Are you
trombone.
really?
Yeah, I'm a trombone player, but certainly can appreciate the brass. Uh,
No way, dude.
indeed, indeed, indeed,
That-
indeed.
So I mean, number one, I love hearing that. I grew up in well, my mother is a musician,
Okay,
and I mean, so I grew up just hanging out with all sorts of musicians as a
that's
kid,
awesome.
and
That's awesome.
huge Louis Armstrong fan.
Yeah,
And, it's funny enough. I mean, you said that you're a trombonist, and I remember, when I went and picked up trombone. Well, I picked up, this is instruments or, oh my goodness, what was it called? Band in
yeah, yeah, yeah,
elementary school.
yeah.
And my teacher at the time was like, "Yeah, you're a bigger guy, so I'm going to give you the trombone," not knowing that I wanted to play the freaking trumpet, and he scared me.
Oh,
I didn't have the courage
no.
to speak up, you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
no,
And
man, that's yeah.
but oh my goodness gracious! But yeah, man. So that must have been how awesome was that just to dive into the history of
Oh, no, yeah,
jazz music.
loved it, loved it, loved it. I mean, it was wonderful. Like the whole that city is just remarkable, truly. I mean, I'm a big Cajun cuisine fan. Just great
Yeah,
drink. I mean, the sounds and the smells of the city are awesome. And certainly for Meyer, like getting to go, like he tried a bit of a beignet and like was bouncing off the walls for sure. But yeah, it was just neat. I mean, we were down there for a wedding,
okay.
so that was quite nice. And I mean, there's tons of like little spots that we did one of the reception at like one of the like small like hole in the wall bars, just like really cool. They were, fixing out like good eats for us or bar food in New Orleans was
That's
was
right. That's
yeah,
right.
but but yeah, we saw it like they do a annual Louis Armstrong in I'm trying now. Now the name of the park is just escaping me, but all the concerts they do in that park, in his name they're all free because he was a
Oh,
promoter of the music. But yeah, it was just neat to go around and see it. I like we they have the history of like how they bury people is really interesting. Um, yeah, it was a cool it was a nice trip. We were only there for a few days, and the drive took up a big portion of it on
yeah,
either direction. But we
yeah.
certainly dug in. Yeah, I don't play as much as I should anymore, but still pick it up periodically. And I taught myself the 12-bar blues like years ago, and so I can
Wow.
play around on my own. And yeah, I like that type. I mean, I enjoy it. And it's a good was it the left side of the brain sort of working
That's
like
right.
flexing that
That's
muscle.
right.
So it's yeah, it's helpful as it breaks up sort of the monotony of some of like the programs and like the systems and whatever to get to stretch the other side and keeps
Well,
keeps
and on that note, let's go ahead and, I appreciate so much you sharing, Matthew. And this is an opportunity, I think, for us to both get to know one another a little bit better. And,
yeah,
uh,
yeah.
I think that the conversation is going to be, super useful for our respective audiences. And I'm just so grateful for you being here. And,
Thanks for having
e-
me. Yeah.
even, oh, of course. But even the way that my brain sort of thinks, and I'm sure we'll get there at some point during the conversation, is my assumption is that the way that you approach systems thinking and legacy planning, knowledge management, for example, through this lens of data, it's probably
Mm,
heavily influenced in some ways, or maybe not, through your background in music, certainly understanding
no
rhythm
doubt.
and who's playing what in the band, right? And
Yeah.
the ability to read a sheet of music, for example, and add your own sort of flair to things. I think there are some parallels certainly in the revenue operations space.
I appreciate you bringing that. I hadn't actually made that connection, and it's a perfect one. You talk about like the CRO being the maestro, and and
That's
and and
right.
there you are. Yeah, no, that's a great analogy.
So on that note, and if we have anyone that hops in, later, or if you're catching the replay, my name is Terrence Latimer. I am a project leader and digital operations strategist at Atomic Revenue. I also serve in the capacity of community manager for our LinkedIn group. the RevOps Masters community, and am super excited to be joined by Matthew Dickert, who I'm going to provide a brief introduction and just sort of an overview. And Matthew, I'd appreciate it. Maybe you could introduce yourself immediately after.
Sure.
Um, but this gentleman is a rock star. He is a new member of our RevOps Masters community. He has a background in revenue operations, specifically through the lens of data management. And just reading straight off of his LinkedIn profile here, has served as a commercial excellence leader where he has leveraged over 20 years of expertise in data analysis, business development, and project management. And so I'm super excited for you being here today, Matthew. Again, I would appreciate you just sort of letting us know a little bit about you, what we
Sure.
should know about you, and we'll hop into today's interview.
That's great. Yeah, Terrence. Again, thank you for having me. I appreciate this, and it's I'm looking forward to this conversation. Yeah, as you had mentioned, I have a sort of a long history in data management, but over the past 8, 10 years, it's transitioned from commercial excellence to revenue operations. Where I've worked with sort of SaaS content as service companies. Transitioned to that from the large CRO pharma space, and prior to that had done I spent a number of years working with Forbes, leading their um, emerging market profiling exercises. And so I took teams into what markets I defined as having untapped investment potential. So a little bit different than the SaaS CRO space, but macro view, similar sort of analysis, large data sets, IMF, World Bank, doing business indicators, et cetera, to try and profile what using that data to profile what I believe to be those untapped investment areas of investment. So yeah, it's sort of long history with it, but through line being sort of how do we leverage data? How do we action that information that it's available to us to glean key insights or uncover those mysteries of what is potential.
That's right, and well said. And it's a little bit warm in the desert, so I'm gonna turn on my fan really quickly. Hold that thought, and I've got something for you. Um,
Okay,
so, and so I think that was, such a perfect introduction. Give me 1 second, Matthew. Apologies.
sure.
I turned on the fan and there was too much feedback, so I just went ahead. I'm splurging on the AC. Um,
It's fair, necessary, indeed.
but that being said, I mean, and just as to provide some additional background for everyone, Matthew joined our revenue operations or our RevOps Masters community, and we had a great virtual coffee that I found to be extremely stimulating. It was great for me just to get an understanding of you, your background, your expertise, and to be able to, ping pong ideas off of one another.
Yeah,
Something that was super, I appreciated part of our original conversation was this concept of data and, through levels of analysis, being able to translate the information into, shared knowledge and then ultimately institutional wisdom that,
mm,
then have the opportunity to extrapolate, some of the core objectives of, the organization, the body, the team that, is responsible for, managing, curating, and or cultivating, I should say, said information.
sure.
And so, today's conversation is specifically around data-driven operations. And, I think, the additional layer of contextualization regarding the contents of today's conversation has come in the form of the analysis of data in light of uncertainty, right? If we are
Yeah,
mindful of tariffs and trade wars and how that ultimately helps us to understand or try to understand the flow of information in and out of our systems. And I'm just curious, Matthew, this is a little bit off kilter based off of the questions that I've sent over to you, but
mm,
I guess my question is, how do you analyze data that is evolving versus, data sets that have been established, for example?
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's a good framing. I think critically, all data is always changing. So there's an inherent part of that question that's natural for me to answer to say, well, yeah, data is of course it's going to be changing, and of course we need to modify our approach. And when we think about metrics for reporting purposes, I mean, the data that we're reporting is always and it's never going to be anything but retroactive or retro backward looking. So we're constant. We have the opportunity with that analysis of data to say, okay, yes, it is changing, but we're reporting on the past, and so are we able to now change going forward? How we look at different pieces of information, whether it be pipeline velocity flows or yeah, I smaller organizations, the volume of inbound leads is critical, and certainly that's important. But as that organization grows, the volume is less critical than maybe the value or the type of targeting that marketing team might go after with it given like their ICP definition, et cetera. But to that question, in a changing landscape, how do we deal with sort of uncertainty, and particularly hopefully not uncertainty in the data, but that's always a possibility. But we have to be adaptable. We need to be building systems that are not just responsive, but are enabled to be thinking, and maybe not necessarily totally AI driven thinking, but the ability for us as practitioners and the systems themselves to be able to respond to changes that need to be made to govern or stimulate the right types of information as it's changing. And a simple example is um, account management, and when firms, smaller firms are looking at starting a new business and they're growing, you're not really worried about maybe the taxable entity, so to speak, but you just want a logo. Maybe you want BP, and that's enough. But as that organization grows and maybe you expand and you go through acquisitions, or you start working with different um, maybe business entities within an organization, some of those critical components of how you define an account record, or a company record, and how you organize that within a CRM system, that's going to change, and so your systems themselves need to be able to adjust as well. But hopefully that addresses that. That's a great question, and I appreciate it. And
No, no, and
yeah,
what a great response, and I appreciate your adaptability and responsiveness in real time, which,
mm,
and that's certainly something that I'm, particularly mindful of is, particularly as it comes to, working with clients and account management, particularly as it relates to, the example that you provided in the form of your CRM, for example, where,
mm,
more often than not, I have found a lot of clients are primarily interested in sort of the set it and forget it sort of approach to
yeah,
systems management versus the dynamic nature of, and that's what's so fascinating is, by definition, the system is evolving based off of the input and output, right? And so
mm,
it behooves you to have enough of a healthy pulse to be able to have some broad estimates or guesstimates on how you need to adapt and or make the system
yeah.
that much more responsive based off of the acclimation or accumulation, I should say, of data, right?
Yeah, well, no doubt, and I appreciate you bringing that up as well. I mean, our CRM platforms or systems themselves. I mean, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself with this, but I mean, are they going to be the systems that we use into the future? Is it going? I mean, yes, you want a single source of truth. However, we are now building out these CRM systems to be constantly updating and ingesting new information. How do we keep it clean? How do we keep it fresh? Are we doing native API builds for Edgar filing systems for financial information, or are we using Dun and Bradstreet or ZoomInfo or whatever that system is? We are no longer just having a CRM platform be our source of information, but it has to be a living almost system that is pulling the right type of information from multiple locations, which are always changing, ever expanding, in such a way that continues to allow us to make those business decisions, generate insights for our leaders in a way that says, hey, like we're looking at a downturn. It's more important that we not only have like the account record information, but is that going to affect our new potential client? Is our customer base going to change as a result of how budgeting decisions are being made by enterprise clients versus non-enterprise clients? Where's our next beluga whale going to be versus like the blue whale type of thing?
That's right.
So I just think it's yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up, and I don't know. I think this is going to be a continued through line through all of these conversations, but are our systems, we have to be adaptable. We have to be prepared to make changes to the system, how it integrates, the type of information that's flowing in. But are those systems really themselves going to be, the bedrock that we understand today, tomorrow? I think the short answer is probably no, but I
Right.
haven't really thought through, what is it going to look like? But we need to be able to adapt to or ask the right questions to say, can we introduce that new tomorrow or be prepared for it?
Oh man, I can't have these conversations with everyone, Matthew. So I certainly, man, that was awesome, and we're geeking out today.
Yeah,
And
indeed, indeed.
it's it's fascinating in my opinion, and because there's almost this emotional connection to the tools that we leverage, and I certainly understand. Based off of the investment, I use several acronyms and naming conventions. We've talked about tools and rules, for example, in
Mm, mm.
sort of the agnosticism of tool selection, to then be able to identify use cases, the rules of the road, and being amenable and adaptable in terms of, hey, well, this tool is no longer working for me based off of updated organizational SOPs, rules, changing environment, for example, and how do we sort of disconnect emotionally from that previous investment in so many different ways in the form of, well, yeah, it took, and again, this thing is the acronym that I use. Before I called it Teams,
Mm,
TEAMS. However, that has expanded into a stream, where the time, energy, attention, money, and space, right? Now, that acronym has expanded into space, time, relationships, energy, attention, and money, right?
no
And
doubt.
we're
Yeah,
then
yeah.
leveraging those resources in order to, get from point A to point B in order to do something, right? It becomes very difficult, I have noticed, to separate out the emotional investment of yesterday based off of the leveraging of the resources that you have today, inclusive of where you want to be or where the organization needs to be tomorrow, right?
No doubt. Oh, well, on all levels. And I mean, I think you've hit on some really nice key points. But one is, first and foremost, is AI is going to change all of this stuff altogether. I mean, there's ServiceNow has recently had the announcement of the introduction of their own CRM, which is driving the industry crazy because there's this AI darling, and now they're going to do CRM. They're going to displace Salesforce, or it's great to think about these things, but yeah, Salesforce is an incumbent. Most organizations, I've worked with, large and small organizations that anchored themselves to Salesforce. Marketing,
Yes.
Microsoft Dynamics was one that I recently worked with. I mean, they have this great Azure, build out with within the whole Microsoft universe. It's got it's clunky in certain areas, but they're also anchored to that. There are small firms. Interestingly, I'm not a I have my own feelings on HubSpot. It's a great marketing platform, and it
Yes.
is really, really, really good for small firms.
Yes.
Um, but scaling up, maybe they need something a little different. And so, but they've anchored to some of those things. And to your point, you've got emotional attachment, and it's not just within the whole of a RevOps, organization, outfit within an organization, but maybe MarOps. Recently I've dealt with a MarOps team that they set up their Salesforce beg your pardon, their HubSpot instance, and that's what they wanted. So you have these, we talked about silos before as well, but
Yes.
over time these silos emerge because these different departments, marketing or sales or customers,
Yes.
build their own metrics, have their own systems, they know what they want. And as you're evolving, and we're facing a new ServiceNow, new CRM, better improved, AI driven. all the benefits, bells and whistles that are going to come with that in terms of insight generation, et cetera. But how do you break that down when you have these siloed instances across departments, across the data system, et cetera? And as you said, there's this emotional entanglement, and then you bring into that consideration it's not just the cost of potentially introducing a new system, but the cost of training people and
Yes.
getting them to adapt to it. There's the cultural cost as well as the financial cost. Do they often, I mean, I would argue they overlay quite consistently.
Yes.
And tearing, breaking that or dissecting that apart is difficult. But yeah, it's a challenge. But again, back to that adaptability side. I mean, how do we build processes that are going to allow us to change the way that we interact with those systems? Do we have good enablement? I mean, it's not just sales enablement. We need
Yes.
enablement across all departments.
Yes.
Is I would argue, and in my current and past experiences, that really is enablement is within the RevOps field. And it's not just teaching, training your sales team how to better leverage ZoomInfo Copilot, because that's a great tool, but getting your marketing team to understand how they're going to interact with their, not maybe it's their existing HubSpot instance that they're using for contact capture, lead generation, but how are they capturing the right types of new lead personas,
Yes.
buying personas, not maybe it's account-based marketing or but even within an account, you need to find the right person to speak to at the right time. And so you need those triggers, those intent signals, et cetera. How do you train them and enable them to engage with the new platform in an excited and passionate manner without that sort of resistance, and which would incur that cost of transitions, et cetera. It's
Never
a
heard of that. I've never heard. Well, that's a cost of transition, which I've actually never heard that metric, and directly leads to, sort of the two-pronged question that I had for you. Because I think what you were alluding to, in my opinion, was velocity, right?
yeah,
The associated
indeed.
velocity with transition, right? Versus, again, like once you have had established metrics, which and again, like I'm just so mindful of how easy it can be to go down rabbit holes, particularly when we're trying
Yeah,
to
yeah,
develop
fair enough.
semblances of consistency. But how do we incorporate new metrics and recognize when previous metrics and sources of truth are no longer serving the organization as we are trying to compete with concepts of velocity?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a great question. I mean, the same way that I think that our systems and our data, we need to be adaptable and agile in the way that we manage changes in data, et cetera. We need to be, you know, agile in our understanding and interpretation of the right metrics that are also changing. I mean, so things like customer lifecycle value. I mean, I, I have my own opinions on things like that. It's an important metric, or the cost of acquisition. It's certainly an important one. I mean, there are thinkers out there like I saw a presentation the other day by Corey Haynes um, from Savvy Cal. Like, and he made an argument that is, I thought compelling for why customer value, a lifetime value is not the best metric, and because it doesn't take into consideration the returning customer. It doesn't
Mm.
help that. So it's I and to your question, how do we introduce the right metrics or evolving metrics? I think they're always going to be evolving the same way data is going
Yes.
to be evolving. And I think with that, I mean, it's the same way that we're enabling users to engage with those platforms where you're convening stakeholders from marketing, from sales to say, hey, like, what is it you need help with our current systems? Those same types of conventions of those cross department stakeholders to understand what is the information that they are concerned or critically interested in. I mean, I'm a big fan of sort of win rate and average deal velocity and
Yes.
NRR, and those are critical. But maybe within a win rate, the flip side of the coin, those loss details, do we have a system or fields that are available to help capture that information? I think that's pretty critical. And, that may be important for your sales team. For your marketing team, they may not care as much about once an opportunity is lost, but they may be interested on why is that opportunity or new lead, why is it not converting to an opportunity, or what's the speed to which that transition from MQL to SQL to opportunity is occurring. Was it due to multiple touches? One of the recent another sort of separate but similar idea I've been playing with in the past was this multiple touch campaigns on leads. Well, yes, absolutely. The multiple touch campaign attribution is critical, but when you're dealing with I guess ARR driven companies, marketing plays a critical role in those existing clients, and when those clients are showing up to webinars. So it's not just a life cycle from lead to close one deal, but lead to close one deal to retention of customer. And are they playing important roles in those retention exercises? Not just customer success. It's customer success working with marketing to design efforts or initiatives that are allowing them to better re-sign a customer, upsell the customer, cross-sell that customer, and are those metrics being measured appropriately? So maybe for sales, loss analysis or loss detail analysis. Customer success marketing, and for existing customers, there's a completely different series of matrices that are critical. And are we evolving? We being in this case RevOps, to help them find that data. It's available, and are we helping to surface that information for them in a way that allows them to make decisions? Marketing, are they investing in more in-person sessions for existing clients, or running more webinar campaigns? Are they partnering with different through different channels with more with a specific partner or incumbent partners? Is there a need to invest in that partner relationship, sponsorship of events? I mean, what is it that they need to be able to make a determination on where they place their budget to help that customer success team as they work on upselling? So in terms of your question, how do we introduce the right types of metrics? I think it's about enabling a process, a system that allows for RevOps to work collaboratively, not only at the data level, the technical level, and the systems level, but in the strategic proposition with those departments to understand what are their initiatives, what are their goals, what are they being held to account on, and can we support that? Hopefully that.
Oh, well said. And I threw a total curveball. So if you're watching the replay, kudos to Matthew for just taking that question and running with it. You did such a great job in your response that, it triggered a couple of things for me emotionally that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share my screen but I'm going to go ahead and set the room a little bit, or set the scene. And Matthew, have you ever watched the show Fargo?
I've seen the movie. I actually have
Okay.
not seen the show. Yeah.
So it's a great show based off of the movie, and ultimately it's about crime in the Midwest, and
Okay.
the scene or the setting changes with each season. However, there was this really great season or great scene in season 2, and I'll share it with you after the call, where this one character described the conflicting definitions of revolution, in that revolution from a celestial perspective was making a complete cycle and coming back from start to finish, right? Coming back to finish from where you started,
Right.
which he thought was interesting, considering sort of the contradiction of a revolution here on Earth, where we leverage the definition to communicate change, right?
Mm, mm, mm.
Whereas both definitions are certainly true, right?
Yeah.
And the expansion for me, particularly as we're considering concepts of metrics and understanding sources of truth, is particularly as it relates to teammates, culture, and holding semblances of, trust and safety in so many different ways of, hey, well, my definition and understanding of the truth is equally as important as your understanding and definition of the truth. And
Yeah.
how do we, hold space for that? Where, just wrapping up this thought here, I had this, recent lesson from and this is such where, organizational management, change management, comes in the form of philosophies, as I've begun
Mm,
to understand them, right? And how we personify and embody that as it relates to communicating, sources of truth, where I've learned this concept of four truths, right? Where there are objective truths, normative truths, subjective truths, and complex truths,
mm,
right? And if we, in so many different ways, have the ability, going back to that emotional connection of, again, having the integrity of understanding our definition of what truthfulness is, or the metrics that are most important to us based off of our individual understanding, but recognizing that we are part of a body, right? So how do we
mm.
enable, to your whole point, these other parts of the organization to understand how our sources of truth are part of a broader understanding of what is right and what is wrong?
Yeah, yeah, I appreciate this. Is it's a good thought exercise. Trying to dig into where do people frame those understandings or definitions of truth.
Yes.
Data. I love it. I love data. I truly do love data because you can use that data to tell any story you want, and it can be
Yes.
any truth that you want, and it's all about framing. And so I think it's a good reminder for myself on a regular basis, particularly as you deal with the marketing department or the sales department or finance. I mean, even IT. I mean, and this is one that I don't think we've gone into, but corporate IT certainly plays a huge role within, and
Yes.
I think dotted line or direct lines within revenue operations and curating those systems, et cetera. But how are we though in these different either silos or departments or overlaps? How are we each understanding or defining what we understand to be true and critical? um,
Yes. Great
and
word.
and to that, not only how do we do it, but can we show some empathy and understanding why marketing? I mean, I, I love hate at times with some of the marketing departments that I've worked with, but why are they understanding pieces of data or information and communicating in certain ways, um, to be the ultimate piece of importance, and maybe it is ultimately important, and maybe it is a part of a larger story, or maybe it's not framed appropriately for that sales CX or rev ops, as in my case it can be. Why was it not framed for me to understand appropriately, or why didn't I change my framing appropriately? So
Yes.
I think there's a big empathy piece of data and data interpretation and communication of that story, that I think is certainly important. But to the way that you introduced it, I mean, certainly truth can be structured or understood differently, and certainly I like that, the objective truths or known truths, and the sort of unknown truths. I'm going to go in my Rumsfeldian piece, but known unknown truths and
Yes.
unknown
Yes.
truths. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, but absolutely.
Oh man, yeah, man. Oh my goodness gracious, you're a smart guy, Matthew. So I'm gonna do my best to, sort of return us to the pace, but the conversation
Please,
has
please, please.
been,
Yeah.
so fantastic. So I guess, one of the first questions that I have for you are, what are the, or not one of the first, one of the multiple that I've got for you, but what are some of the early signals that a company's go-to-market engine is misaligned with its revenue goals?
Yeah. I think there are probably a couple ones that are certainly important that sort of stick out for me. I hmm. Forecasts are not being aligned with actual revenue output, I think is certainly a critical one. I think that's, it's probably straightforward and everyone sort of understands that, but that there's obviously some issue at hand where if you're putting out a forecast and it ties into annual plans versus adaptive plans. Maybe that's a consequence, and that's pretty critical. And another one is on the people ops side, but maybe you're not able to hold on to your best salespeople because maybe the underlying incentive program for them is not structured appropriately. I think that on the people ops side, the retention is probably pretty critical. For me, and I think there are a whole litany of potential answers here, but what's near and dear to my heart and RevOps and moving from commercial excellence to RevOps, and I think you shared with me some thought questions in this area as well, but am I inundated with requests that are not, it's supporting vanity metrics, or are we so overloaded with things that are not driving impactful, communication or insights to leadership? Are we getting constant requests for field updates or field name changes, or are we getting requests for what's this other tech stack from a new high, tech is important. I think the ability to and you constantly need to be able to assess new tech, but the principle being like, and to your question, how do you know if things are misaligned? It's if RevOps, the RevOps
Matthew, I
function
think
is.
you've gone silent.
Yeah, can you hear me
Oh,
now?
there we go. Yeah,
Okay.
sorry.
All right. Sorry. Yeah, I don't know where I left off, but in brief, basically, I think one of the big ones and critical ones for me, and it's I'll own it that I'm saying it's my answer, but if the RevOps department is inundated with requests that are maybe not, they're monotonous, but monotonous is the wrong word, because system field updates, changes, etc. Assessment of new technology, or maybe there's concern over data integrity. That's important, but if the focus is that root level, the volume of requests is so great that you can't actually execute some of those maybe higher value insight generating exercises, that's definitely a sign of misalignment.
Yeah, well said. And I certainly appreciate, and I think that even goes back to the earlier points of the conversation and understanding, because again, you can set a goal, right, based off of your understanding of the metrics, but having the adaptability, the willingness to change, for example,
Mm,
based off of the information coming in and helping you to maybe contextualize whether or not you have assigned goals to the wrong metrics, for example. Whereas, if you're focused on your
no
annual
doubt.
planning, we want to hire X number of contractors or employees, where to your point, if the quality of either your onboarding strategy, your recruitment strategy is leading to, deep levels of churn, should the focus have actually been on developing a more sophisticated people operation strategy,
Yeah.
right? That can, potentially identify those employees that maybe are going to be sticking around longer, for example.
Right.
Or is it
Right.
that, the compensation plan, to your whole point?
Yeah, I mean, I think another important one here that I had forgot to mention, and it's pretty basic, but if you have sort of extended sales cycles, I mean, things as simple as that. If deals are taking longer to close without clear reasons, that obviously indicates there's some type of internal friction, or lack of clarity in that sales process. And I mean, I bring that up. I mean, it was you know not too long ago that we saw this. I mean, a sales cycle taking 2 years. Like, well, I don't know if I necessarily believe that, and maybe it does, but it's not really that 2 year, the true sales cycle is only a piece of that 2 years. Maybe it's not broken out, but with that, in terms of maybe you started a deal with wrong time, maybe the client didn't have budget, or it was lost due to a change in a point of contact or decision maker, whatever. But those clear points are, those are certainly segmentations in a buying process, and to start to what should be finished, to as opposed to 2 years. But if you're looking at that, it says, hey, this deal is two plus years to close. That's maybe maybe not accurate and maybe leading you astray into believing, what is critical in understanding how you get a deal across the finish line. Maybe it's about the right, getting to a client at the right time within their budget decision making process. Maybe you don't have those right stakeholders. It could be any number of things, but yeah, I think that extended sales cycle can be a pretty pardon me, is another important one of sort of misalignment.
Yeah, yeah, certainly. Now, from your well, I suppose, when we're mindful of your approach to rev operations in, both fast growth versus mature environments, I'm
Mm,
curious as to your process for collecting and aggregating data, for example, that ultimately allows you to define the systems that are appropriate for sort of the life cycle of the organization. And I think you've mentioned some already, but how do you approach your data gathering and analysis process based off of the life cycle of the org?
absolutely. And I appreciate the question, and I'll try and keep it pointed. But yeah, I think there is, with fast growth companies, I think, done is better than perfect. And so the objective is to get, actionable information in quickly, but, because you're growing rapidly. With more mature organizations, you have a chance to really, come back and assess and take stock of what that data is and begin to interrogate it in ways that can generate meaning. And with that, to your question, what is the approach for capturing the right types of data, and how do you get it, where's it coming from, et cetera. And it ties in with this issue of trust that we as an underlying theme with the data. Is the data from a trusted source? Do your colleagues or cross department equals, do they believe it, do they trust it, do they validate it? Is the data being interrogated or integrated into the system and then aligned with maybe approaches that are maybe native built to help assess appropriateness of an account or persona, and maybe a sweet spot type of style? All of that to frame that, how do I capture data? Well, one, it's important for me to assess the vendors that I'm going to be dealing with. Do I trust them? I've used a variety of systems, including Dun Bradstreet, which I think is really good. It's for mature account information. I do take some issue with their contact record information, but you have other systems that, like ZoomInfo, which has remarkable contact information. They have very good North American contact information. They've been investing heavily in European efforts, but there was a gap for a little while, and so you looked at other sources like Cognizant, which was a little bit more, for at the time was for my purposes, had some more robust European potential contacts. But all of that said, that's anecdotal. The answer being, do you trust the vendor? And once you've got the vendor, have you built a system? I mean, all these vendors have their own native integrations with Salesforce, with CRM, with Microsoft Dynamics, with HubSpot, et cetera. Are you integrating them in to the system? And then once the data is flowing in, it's not just capturing. It's not one of those set and forgets. But have you set up, or and particularly in more mature organizations, begun to automate enrichment activities? Is it happening on a regular basis? Are you getting flags when contact records are changing, or when a merger or acquisition has occurred? And then how do you take advantage of that if they're within your target ICP for prospecting or your existing client base? We have departments get sold here between companies, and as a result, a department within one organization may have access to a potential service, and now as they shift, they're not going to, but they get to become great microphones for you for a potential new customer, et cetera. And so how do you work with that piece of information? So maybe that's working directly with account management, customer success teams to find ways to lubricate that transition. But critically, back to the original question is, how do you bring that data in, and then how do you interrogate it, and then obviously how do you ensure it's trusted? Having good governance procedures in place and hygiene efforts are critical. And then on the softer, less technical side, but communication with your colleagues within marketing. So maybe you set up an attractiveness profile for a contact based on a particular persona, and they don't believe that, or they don't realize that there's a reason for it. There's validation, and maybe you needed to get their buy-in on how that was being validated. But that communication across departments on the softer side, less technical but softer, that these things are occurring, and critically enabling them to understand, see, and interrogate it themselves within the systems, I think is equally important. But I hopefully that sort of wraps everything
Yeah,
up
yeah, great,
with my
great.
share.
Well,
Yeah.
that was a great response, and my immediate question is, what is your process for assessing these vendors and being able to curate that level of trust in, their data collection efforts, as well as the level of confidence that imbibes you in terms of, the integration
Yeah.
portion, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I want first and foremost, I mean, communities like this are a big one for me, where I can, I'm constantly reading, constantly curious. I'm wondering what people are saying, with the experiences they're having. I mean, so that's a big part of it. Another one is, I've worked in sales, and so I've pitched, and I know when I'm being pitched. But I certainly I appreciate that back and forth with a vendor, and but the willingness for good sales representatives to work with me to um, share not only promoters or maybe detractors, people that could speak about their experiences with me. The willingness to be open is certainly a good sign that it's potentially a relationship that can be built on trust and exchange of ideas. um, doing demonstrations, I think is critical. And then, I mean, no vendor relationship is 100% it done. They obviously, once it's been integrated, it becomes sticky. That's important. But I had an experience with Outreach, and Outreach was a great platform, but I could not get them to work with my IT to get a SSO worked out, and so that relationship failed. But to the point that no purchase is done. It's not foolproof, et cetera. So to that end, I think you know being aware of what the community is doing, listening, reading, hearing, interpreting, and sharing, experiences is critical. The ability to, you know, I don't want to say interrogate salespeople, but to be able to, have those conversations. And I appreciate them. Being on the other side, I've done it on the other side. It's always entertaining is the wrong word, but it's educational, it's informative, and it can be a fun dialogue. And if you go into that dialogue in such a manner, I think that's probably critical as well. And then just being able to routinely and regularly engage, roll my sleeves up, so to speak, and engage the platform that has been purchased, the data that's been done. Working with specific data provider vendors like Merit. Merit was a great vendor that I had worked with on contact acquisition, but it was important because it was a two-way relationship. I had to critically assess what I wanted. I gave them personas. I went through a detailed exercise to understand what it was I was asking for within for a different business units and the different needs for what their sweet spot buying persona was within their ICP, their enterprise, non-enterprise types of clients. And then I was able to work with this vendor, Merit, remarkably, and we had back and forth because we had a couple trials that things hit, some didn't, but the willingness to roll up my sleeves and get involved with it was also critically important. So I think those core buckets are sort of how I approach it.
Well said. And, I think it's just the consummate reminder. I mean, even coming full circle with, the agnosticism that we, got done describing, in that, certainly, like, once you make that purchase decision, you've assessed the tool, you've understood like how you're using it, you know what
Hmm.
I mean? Like, that is an important part of the process. However, from that perspective, it's then becoming matter expert, and that typically, if they're doing, the vendor, for example, is doing their job right, they are constantly updating the product, right? Just
No
based
doubt.
off of the right, very nature of the relationship based off of their unique understanding of you as their
Mm,
ICP and the
yeah.
maturing needs, right?
Mm,
And then at the same time, there is also, I think, to your point, that responsibility of, and I know it's annoying, we're all constantly getting emails and sales calls all day, but some of that comes in the form of be pitched. You know what I
yeah,
mean? See, what's going on in the market, what current events are,
exactly. Ear to the
right?
ground. That's right.
So, totally, right, and that is such an important part of the process, and again, there is some of that flexibility of, like, being married and committed to what you have, but then
Mm,
also sort of recognizing that, you can still this is not a real marriage in so many different ways, you can still do a little bit of
we're
dating and
all
see what's out
we're all growing, we're all changing constantly, and no, and again, particularly in today's environment where things are
there.
so
Yes,
rapidly coming to market, they're so rapidly changing when they get to market. There's such a. I mean, I will never pretend to know it all. There's no way. There's no way I could. And it's
right,
exciting
right.
because those things that I don't know, like, I don't know what I don't know yet, and the only way I'm going to learn is by listening, by hearing, by and can't read it all either. But I'd love to have the time to do it. But yeah, it's I certainly in that respect I like being approached because yeah, maybe there is a new solution to something that I hadn't it was the quintessential sales process. I'm going to create a solution for a problem you didn't know you even had yet. Well, yeah, that's
I
true. But to that end, I mean, maybe it is something remarkable, et cetera.
Oh my goodness. Well, we've only got about 8 minutes, so I'm going to try to hit you with the best question for our
Yeah.
community, and would then encourage us to number one. I think we need to have a part two sometime in the future because
Oh,
you are just
yeah.
a wealth of information. But I suppose I get the question that I would love to hear a little bit more about from you and your perspective is what does an ideal revenue operations organization or structure look like, and when should a company invest in one?
No, that's a great question. Yeah, and please understand that my answer it is my own and it is based on some of my experiences, et cetera. And yeah, just take it for what it's worth. But yeah, I think a good and what I guess the theme for our conversation is scalable revenue system or revenue rev ops structure is one that can efficiently grow disproportionate right to the increase in resources people tools budget that are invested. I think that's important. A system that is um, it can sustain growth without hitting bottlenecks. I think that in brief, is sort of what I would understand as my ideal revenue system. Just again, that it is able to grow disproportionate of the resources that the organization has. Basically, you're getting more with less, and that's critical. Um, in terms of common
Oh,
traits. Oh,
yeah.
did
Sorry,
you?
please continue. Please
Okay,
continue.
okay,
Sorry.
okay, okay. Yeah, I think common traits. You have a single source of truth that's reliable, that your GTM can trust. It's works across sales, marketing, customer success. Um, you've achieved cross functional, or you're working towards achieving cross functional alignment. There's collaboration with shared objectives across RevOps, FinOps, People Ops, and I would argue IT, corporate IT, as obviously as you work with acquiring new tech. I mean, legal is a critical part of this as well. Clients, tech, et cetera. Um, Operational agility is paramount. Processes are always going to change. Strategies shift, et cetera, particularly in dynamic markets like we have now, and so you need to be agile in your response to those changes. You said it earlier; it can't be a set and forget. It has to be one that's listening and not just reporting. Um, yeah, and I think above all else, and on the data side, and something near and dear to my heart, proactive governance. We need good stewardship and processes by which you're regularly engaging the hygiene of your data, and pardon me, it's something that your stakeholders, are can trust, but also are aligned in defining. And I think that's another one of the, we haven't spoken too much about it, but that's a big part is, that stakeholder definition in terms of what do we all understand? Are we all understanding the same thing in the same way? And
Yeah.
do we appreciate how others might be interpreting something?
Oh my goodness gracious. Well, what a great conversation, Matthew. So deeply appreciative of your stream, the space, the time, the relationship with you, the energy that you've
And the,
invested, the attention to
vice versa.
detail, right? And certainly I'm hoping that this is an opportunity to continue to collaborate in the form of adding value to future and prospective customers. My question for you, before we, wrap things up here is what are the best ways for our audience to engage with you, to work with you? Do you have any upcoming events that people need to hear about? How can people, if they're interested in getting in touch, what's the best way to do
Yeah.
so?
Not I appreciate Terrence. I appreciate that, and I won't do too much shameless self promotion. But yeah, LinkedIn is great. I recently am in the process of uh, launching my own outfit, Vistara Advisory. So we're also on LinkedIn. You can check us out on the web our website. It's vistaraadvisory.com. I can put it in the chat as well, or
Please,
share it with
please.
you to share around with the group. But yeah, no immediate upcoming events, but I'm always open and excited about conversations. Terrence, that's how we met, and I couldn't be happier that we did. But yeah, reach out, and I'd be happy to follow up with anybody that has questions or just wants to chat.
That's right. Yeah. And we're going to go ahead and share this video across the Atomic Revenue YouTube channel, as well as, the first viewers are going to be members of our RevOps Masters community, which I'll go ahead and post. And once Matthew and I hop off the call, the reminder for me, comes in the form of, Atomic has recently, recognized, particularly in light of the economic environment that we're in, how important it is to, reinvest and maybe, recheck the system that has allowed your organization to be where it is today. And so if you are interested in working with Atomic Revenue, our digital operations audit is a great place to get started in order to understand your overarching digital operation strategy and be able to, provide some insights in terms of normalizing what is ultimately a changing economic environment, and then as well as our revenue diagnostics product, which is a great way to glean some additional insights